there was a need. There were no books. I didn't find no books, no French books that could facilitate the teaching of French. So I had to research and publish a book. The first book I published was French Made Easy. So when I published that book, I took a copy of the book to the rector of the seminary where I was studying philosophy. I gave him the copy of the book. So he was excited. He presented the book in the conference. And during the conference, he said, George Nchumbonga was following the footsteps of Bernard Fonlon. I didn't know who Bernard Fonlon was. He said Bernard Fonlon was a Cameroonian who would distinguish himself with his writings at Bigard Memorial Seminary in Enugu, Nigeria. So George is following his footsteps. I didn't know who Bernard Fonlon was. So that gave me homework.
Why knowledge matters. George Nchumbonga, welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Yannick.
It's such a pleasure to always see your wonderful and inspiring smile. You are here to talk about your recent published book called Professor Bernard Fonlon Crusaded for Sainthood in Cameroon, Africa, yes. Volume number 1. What made you write the book in the first place, George?
In the first place, Mr. Yannick, before I answer that question, I would like to thank you for the interest you have in what I've been doing. You know, I still have very good memories of you at St. Paul University, Ottawa, when we met, and thank you for what you are doing. I really appreciate it. With regards to your question, Professor Bernard Fonlon is the first English-speaking Cameroonian to earn a PhD in 1961. So he's the first bilingual. When he came back from Ireland after having earned a PhD, he was immediately hired by the then President Amadou Ahidjo, the first president of Cameroon, as his interpreter and translator, because he knew the two languages. I was not born in 1961, but I studied philosophy in Nigeria. I am from Cameroon, but I studied philosophy in Nigeria. So while studying philosophy in Nigeria, I published my first book titled French Made Easy. I was invited by the Faculty of Philosophy to lecture. I was a student, seminarian, philosophy student, but I was invited by the faculty, the then Dean of Studies of Philosophy, to lecture French in the Faculty of Philosophy because the lecturer was sick and had been operated upon. So I began teaching French to the second year philosophers. I was in first year. So while teaching them French, there was a need. There were no books. I didn't find no books, no French books that could facilitate the teaching of French. So I had to research and publish a book. The first book I published was French Made Easy. So when I published that book, I took a copy of the book to the rector of the seminary where I was studying philosophy. I gave him the copy of the book. So he was excited. He presented the book in the conference. And during the conference, he said, George Nchumbonga was following the footsteps of Bernard Fonlon. I didn't know who Bernard Fonlon was. He said Bernard Fonlon was a Cameroonian who would distinguish himself with his writings at Bigard Memorial Seminary in Enugu, Nigeria. So George is following his footsteps. I didn't know who Bernard Fonlon was. So that gave me homework. In fact, it was an embarrassment for me that I did not know who Bernard Fonlon was, a Cameroonian, why other people were talking about him. So I put myself into work. I started investigating who this man was. Started reading about him. And that was the first experience. The second experience was during holidays. I went to Owerri. And Owerri is in Imo State. That's about, it's not far from Ikotekwene, where I was. So when I went there for holidays, I got to meet a Monsignor who was a classmate of Bernard Fonlon. He was a classmate of Bernard Fonlon in the seminary at Bigard. So he told me so many good things about Fonlon. He said, "Oh, I'm so happy. What about his course of beatification?" He told me wonderful anecdotes because he was his classmate. That was the second experience I had with Fonlon. The last was when I went to Rome. Before going to Canada, I did theology in Rome at the Urban University. And when I got there, I had an audience with Cardinal Arinze. Cardinal Francis Arinze is a Nigerian cardinal who is resident in Vatican. In fact, he turned 90 years on the 1st of November. So I requested an audience to meet Cardinal Arinze. And when I met Cardinal Arinze, the first thing he asked me was, where has the process of Bernard Fonlon reached his process of beatification? This is the third person talking to me about Bernard Fonlon. So these three experiences is what inspired me to do a research on Bernard Fonlon. I don't know if I've answered that question. These three experiences of first with the rector in Nigeria, second with the classmate of Bernard Fonlon, and third with Cardinal Arinze, who knew Bernard Fonlon very well in the seminary at Bigat. So these three experiences inspired me to do a research on him to crusade for his beatification.
This is really inspiring. So basically it happened somehow to you, for you, and really for all of us in order to learn more about Bernard Fonlon.
Yes.
What was the biggest challenge in writing the book?
The biggest challenge in writing the book was the distances. I had to travel so many distances to meet people who knew Bernard Fonlon, to interview them. It was a scientific research. So I had to travel to Nigeria. It was during the COVID-19. It was a terrible period to travel, but I took the risk. I flew from Germany to Cameroon. I interviewed Professor Lantum, who was the best friend of Bernard Fonlon. Professor Lantum was about 87 years old then. So he barely spoke, but he was still very, very mentally active. So he narrated to me his experience with Bernard Fonlon. So I interviewed him. I also interviewed a student whom Bernard Fonlon gave a scholarship to study in Russia, Chief Alemanji. So I also interviewed a lecturer, Senior Alemkon Richard. I also interviewed Cardinal Christian Toomey before his demise, before he died. Cardinal Christian Toomey was a pupil of Bernard Fonlon. Bernard Fonlon taught him. So you can imagine. So I met all these people. And unfortunately, Cardinal Toomey is of late. Professor Lantum is of late. So you can imagine what would have happened if I didn't meet these people. Their testimonies are very, very are of primordial importance, which I recorded. They're all on my channel on YouTube, and I documented and I've published the book. So that was in Cameroon. In Nigeria, I interviewed Monsignor Aguiazo Alphonsus, who was a classmate of Bernard Fonlon. I interviewed the Bishop of Uyo. I interviewed Cardinal Onaikon. I interviewed other monsignors which I interviewed. So there is a long list of people I interviewed who knew Bernard Fonlon. So and all these people testified that he lived a life of heroic virtues. He distinguished himself first as a seminarian. He hardly went for breakfast, always studying Greek and Hebrew. He was a very, very materially detached from material things. His own was the mind. How do you form the mind? How do you live a holy life? So that was it. So you can imagine the difficulty traveling to to Cameroon during the COVID-19. In fact, I didn't even know that I needed a COVID test. I needed to be negative to fly. I didn't know until I got to Brussels, and I was refused to board the plane. Can you imagine that? I slept at the airport in Brussels. I had to do the COVID test, and I had to fly the following day. So all these difficulties I went through because of Bernard Fonlon. And then in Cameroon, I had to go to Nigeria through the flying boat. Flying boat is a boat where you cross the Atlantic Ocean. 3 hours in the Atlantic Ocean to get to Nigeria. So these are some of the difficulties I went through. And then I finished, went back to Cameroon and flew back to Germany, and then went to Rome, to the Vatican, to interview Cardinal Francis Arinze, who knew Bernard Fonlon. So these are some of the difficulties I went through, difficulties of traveling, during the COVID-19 period. But I did it so courageously with undescribable faith. My faith was, I couldn't describe it, I wanted this thing to be done.
I mean, it's so inspiring, given the challenges, really like the tangible challenge you went through during the COVID, because everyone knows it was so annoying to travel with all these tests, and hopefully, it's I think we are on better in better waters now. What was the most touching testimony that you heard about Bernard Fonlon?
The most touching testimony that I heard about Bernard Fonlon, the first is his experience with Cardinal Arinze. Cardinal Arinze noted in fact, Cardinal Arinze wrote a 2-page tribute on him. And one of the things that touched me so much about Professor Bernard Fonlon was his high degree of detachment from material things. According to him, he didn't believe that material things was the most important. He was totally detached from material things. In fact, Cardinal Arinze recounts a situation in which they were eating together, and he was so immersed in the discussion that he even forgot that he had eaten. So you can imagine that type of person who is not distracted by materialistic things, but who is so imbibed in his mind, the things that really matter. That really touched me. And then another thing that touched me was the interview I had with Monsignor Alphonsus Aguiaz, who was his classmate, because Professor Fonlon was to be ordained a priest together with Alphonsus Aguiaz, but he was stopped for ordination on the morning of the ordination. So the way he reacted to his not being permitted for ordination was so outstanding. He kept calm, continued doing what he had to do. During the first mass of his classmate, he went for the ordination. And when his classmate, Monsignor Alphonsus, had to go back to Enugu, he stopped in Onitsha, slept in his house. The following day, Fonlon served his mass. So you can imagine, that really touched me, that this is a man who is not overtaken by difficulties, who knows that God has a plan for everybody and his divine providence never fails. So these testimonies really touched me and gave me a great sense of resilience, that in life, despite what happens to you, you just have to know that God has a plan for you. Yes, those are the two main testimonies that really touched me.
What was the greatest joy to you during the process of writing? Because I assume it was also a very difficult process.
I have a gift of writing. I easily write things, and I have this great ability to be disposed to write. I can spend a whole day in my room writing without going out. It's just part of me. I have that passion to write. So that is what really helped me to transcribe all the interviews I had. I had to put them into paper to transcribe each of them. You can imagine how painstaking it is and how Herculean it is. But it was really a difficult moment, but I did it with a lot of passion.
Why should people read your book about Bernard Fonlon?
People should read my book about Bernard Fonlon because, first, the aim of that book is to crusade his beatification. In fact, I have written 2 open letters to the Bishop of Kumbo, Monsignor George Nkwo, about the importance of launching the cause of beatification of Bernard Fonlon. First, this man was a layman in politics. He distinguished himself. You can imagine an ex-seminarian coming into politics with the luggage of formation. Seminary formation consists of spiritual formation, spiritual, human formation, pastoral formation, and there are 4 of them. There are 4 of them. You have the spiritual, you have the human, you have the pastoral, and you have the intellectual formation. So you can imagine somebody who was formed with those 4. It's a holistic formation: spiritual, pastoral, human, and intellectual. So with all this luggage from seminary formation, he came into politics and distinguished himself as a selfless minister. In fact, he was minister during the regime of President Ahmadu Ahijo, and he distinguished himself by living the heroic virtues, always coming to time at the office. He was a very simple man, very, very accessible. You see, ministers today, you can't even get to them. You can't even meet them because they are up there. But Fonlon was a very simple man, approachable, and of service, always working. So people need to buy my book to discover more of this man, this Cameroonian man who distinguished himself with the heroic virtues in politics. He was a Christian and an intellectual in politics.
How did Bernard Fonlon influence your thinking?
Bernard Fonlon has influenced my thinking and way of life totally. From when I was in Nigeria, and he has really taught me, the right way of life, the things that really matter. My way of dressing, my way of thinking, he has influenced my way of writing too. Because I am, whenever I write, I'm motivated by his writings, by his discipline, his self-discipline, and his total entrega. You say in Spanish, entregar. Total self-giving, he gives himself totally for whatever he wants to do. So I've been totally influenced by that. I've all the books you see I'm writing and publishing about people. I just recently published another book about Cardinal Arinze, 90th birthday, first script. 2 volumes have been published already. So you can imagine. So Fonlon is influencing me to give my life for others, to write for others, to promote others, to speak about others. Because he did too. He wrote so many books about people, and he was a researcher, and he loved to document. He was always writing down things that happened. If you want to go to Cameroon now and you want to know what happened in Cameroon, from the 60s when he came back to 80s when he died, you just have to take the cultural review called Abia. This was a cultural review book, almost 600 pages, which used to be published every month. So Fonlon was the editor-in-chief and the founder of that Cameroon review. So you can imagine the documentation about culture, about different sciences, which he put together once every month. At times it was once every year, depending on the articles that came in from various authors. So I think I'm following his footsteps, and that's why I had to establish this NGO, non-profit organization, research, documentation, language, and culture. Because Fonlon was a man of culture. He was a man of research. He was a man of language. He could speak many languages. In fact, he was the minister of missions, of foreign affairs. So he knew he could manipulate many languages and cultures. So I think I'm trying to follow his footsteps, try to emulate.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you are also a multilingualist. I think you speak fluently 8 languages, isn't it?
I always feel ashamed when people ask me that. I tell them, well, the passion I had for languages it was from childhood, I was exposed to so many missionaries who came in Balmayo. We had many missionaries from Italy. I used to listen to the way they would speak Italian. Oh my God, Spanish, German. I said, God, I would love to speak with these people in their language. So I started learning those languages gradually and traveled to these various countries, and that was how I was able to dominate them.
You are really a multi-talent I mean, this is for sure. What made you become a man of faith?
The first thing that made me become a man of faith is my family. They say that the first church is the family. The first church, that's where you learn about the faith. That's where you are, that's where you are, what's the right English word? You are groomed, you are brought up. So my family is a very, very Catholic family. My father taught me how to say the rosary. Every Sunday we went to church. We live very close to the cathedral of Mbalmayo, where I was born. In fact, Mbalmayo, the first bishop of Mbalmayo is the very first bishop of Central Africa, the first Black indigenous bishop of Central Africa, Bishop Paul Etoga. So as a small boy, I used to serve on mass close to the cathedral where we lived, and associated myself a lot with priests. My parish priest, Monsignor, Father Engelbert Meyongo. I was very close to priests, and that was why I went to the minor seminary in Bishop Ogan, the major seminary in Nigeria. And so that really nurtured my vocation and my knowledge of God. And when I studied theology in Rome, oh my God, that was the apex. That was the apex. Theology is the science of God. We had powerful professors. Oh, Gargano. Gargano was taught us spirituality. When he teaches you spirituality, you can just die. You can just say, "Oh, I don't need to live anymore. This man has satisfied my spirit." Gargano. Or when when Gargano used to come to class, volete capire ciò che sto dicendo, ragazzi. This man, he's a Benedictine priest, an expert in theology. So with all these professors, why would you think that you would not be affected? They were like fire. People would touch you. The most astounding was Professor Ebulefu. John Ebulefu is a Nigerian professor. Oh my God. He was formed in Germany. Karl Rahner was his professor. Can you imagine Karl Rahner, the German Karl Rahner? And then later on, he got to know Ratzinger, then Ratzinger, who was the professor in Münster, who is now Benedict XVI Emeritus.
Where you really did your PhD, University of Münster, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where I'm doing. I just submit. I did my. That's why I was enrolled for the PhD in Münster, which is a very unique university in Germany. It's a very, very. It's an outstanding and world-renowned university, especially in the domain of theology. So these professors, my family, and the people I interact with, they have nurtured my vocation and my knowledge of God.
And you are really the best testimony. You are truly something different. Your energy, your love for people, your passion for theology, for studying, for inquiry. It's truly, when I talk to you, when I see you, you truly show me what Gandhi always preached, right? Or preached in the sense that you have to be the change that you want to see in the world. And so therefore I'm extremely pleased that George, talking to you today. What makes you feel alive?
What makes me feel alive is what I am contributing for others. It's what I'm impacting into the society. For me, there's nothing that satisfies me more than that, especially in the domain of, that's why I say I'm so passionate about writing. There's no satisfaction that I have than when my articles are published, when I publish a book. It makes me alive. It confirms that I am contributing, I'm giving out something for others. I teach French, Spanish, German to so many people free of charge on Skype. So when I do that and they speak the language, I was a teacher in Mexico of French, English, and when I go back to Mexico and my students want to organize a party, they speak English with me, they speak French with me. Some of them are in France. I feel so satisfied that I was able to give out something for free, not necessarily for money making. That's what really makes me alive, to contribute, to share my talent to others and to promote others. I like to promote others. You see, my encomiums are mostly about others. I like to draw out the virtues of others and promote them. Yes. That's what makes me alive.
I can't wait to read one day a book about yourself. I'm sure one day someone comes and writes a book about you. That's 100% worthwhile, I'm sure. George
Yes,
Nchumbonga, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's my honor, and I really thank you too for when you started sending me messages about this, I thought you were joking. So I was so impressed that I also praise your committedness. What you're doing now is trying to share your talents too and your gifts. So that's admirable. So thank you very much.
George Nchumbonga.
Yes.
That's why knowledge.